My name is Mary Savage and I'm a member of Hilltown Historical Society, and I'm going to talk a wee bit about the history of the bullying in this area. Bullying is a very, very old custom, which it is said dates back as far as the 17th or maybe even the 16th century. And the word bully is derived from the Gaelic bu, which means pertaining to a cow. And in Kirkullion Town land, which is on the Restrever Road from Hilltown, there's a site which we would talk about as the Bully Green, or in local dialect it would be called the Boleying Green, so it is. And it is thought that this word Boley, which is Buaile, is recorded in 1595 by Edmund Spenser in the View of the State of Ireland. It's meaning a bully, a field or a building where cattle are kept for milking. The practice was actually where the animals, were usually cattle, were moved during the summer months to bully sites situated some distance away from the farms. These sites were in the mountains where the peat-based soil would have give good grazing for the cattle during the summer months. And there's traces of the bully sites. They're pretty difficult to find, but they're described in the 18th century by Harris when he was talking about the Mourne Mountains. He said that in the bosom of the Mourne Mountains there's a place called the Deer's Meadow, to which great numbers of poor people resort in the summer months to graze their cattle. They bring their wives, children and essential pots and erect huts, and there live and often cut turf for the winter fuel. Now, he refers to poor people. It wasn't always poor people that went to these bully sites. Some people went because it was the custom to do that, and some others went because they were simply inclined to do that. So it wasn't always about poverty. And bullying was a very common practice in the Mournes, and seems to have lasted longer on what we would call the backside of the Mourne Mountains, which is the Hilltown side. And it was usually used for cattle because grazing sheep on the mountains wasn't allowed by most of the estates up until it is thought about the 1880s. Before sheep, I know the Downshire estate, it was after 1880 before people were allowed to graze sheep on it. Before that it was mainly used for cattle and horses. Now we also can find accounts of bullying in the west of Ireland. Donegal and Achill Islands show the practice was carried out there as well. Now the bully huts were built of sods and gravelly soil and thatched with rushes usually. And there would have been Professor Estein Evans that wrote More and Country. He excavated some of the sites in the Deer's Meadow just before Spelga Dam, the dam was filled up with the water, and he was able to identify a couple of clusters of the bully huts, and they were usually in a small group at the headwater, at the head water of a stream, where a stream was starting off. And these sites were found where in the summertime, now you can see the old road that when the dam dries up in the summer you can walk down, and on the right hand side of the road is the last of the sites of those which Professor Evans found. They're approximately 12 foot square internally, and would have had a hearth in the middle where they obviously had made heat for themselves, and the walls were always composed of the layers of sods and gravelly soil. And in some exceptional cases there's been found sites where they had been built with stones, but they were very rare. It was usually with the sods. When they would have been staying in the mountains, these cattle herders would have cut turf to provide themselves with winter fuel, and the women probably might have been involved in spinning wool from the sheep, and butter making was what they would have been doing. We have often been told, or tradition tells us, that one woman who was up in the Deer's Meadow carried a churn of milk on her back from the Butter Mountain back to her home in Stang, which would have been about 3 or 4 miles. And when she reached home, the milk was churned and the butter was floating on the top of it with all the jolting it got on her back when she was coming down the mountain. And now one man said the women of them times were a lot fitter than the ones nowadays. And in the Leitrim townland, which is where I am from, the farmers would have went to Pierce's Castle, up from Leitrim Lodge, up by Torham Rock, were the Boley huts. And again, there had been traces of Boley huts found up on that site. And it is said that people came from far away as Banbridge to Boley sites in those days. When they were living up in the Deer's Meadow or at the Pierce's Castle, they probably more than likely sustained themselves with the milk from the cows, and they would have had the bare essentials of flour and stuff with them, that they would have had enough food to sustain them. We have no records to see whether the people, once they went up for the summer months, if they came back to their own houses or not. They may have done. It's possible that some of them didn't, that they just stayed there for the duration of the summer months. Let's see, the Boley huts were always circular. I don't know, were always circular in shape. So they were, and as I said, built in wee clusters. But it was this tradition of Boleying that led in the mid-1980s for a few people around the Hilltown area to decide that they would recreate some of the old traditions, and the first Boley Fair was recreated at that time. The people were dressed up in the old clothes and everything, similar to what would have been in the previous generations. It is thought the Boleying maybe ended after the time of the famine, when there's not very many records of it happening much after that time. But during the Boley Fair, they sort of tried to create the old customs of wool spinning, blacksmith skills, horse ploughing, threshing, butter making, jam making, and the old games that the children would have had in previous years, like skittles and sprickleback catching. During the Boley Fair, they erected an example of a Boley hut in the square in Hilltown, and it created a lot of interest because people were interested to know just the history of it and what happened and how people managed to live in such a small hut and carry on their life. Most of the farmers from the area at that time would have had very few stock. Each family would have had a few cows and calves. There wouldn't have been the large, extensive numbers of animals there is now in farms. It would have been quite small, I would imagine, and they would have been mostly kept to provide the milk and dairy produce that, from that. And the farmers that from the Leitrim townland that went to the Castle Bog Boley sites, when they made the butter, it was sold in the market in Rathfriland or in Uri, that they would have took the butter, they would have had surplus butter and sold that on, as they would have done with any items that the women had made from spinning the sheep's wool. It had been used as to provide some money for other products, When the Boley Fair, it was also decided that they would recreate a day, a sort of a walk to the sites of the Boley sites, and it was very successful that for a couple of years, where they went up from Leitrim Lodge and walked up at Leitrim Lodge Car Park, walked up to the Castle Bog, saw the sites of where the traces of the Boley huts are, and then went on up and there was turf cutting. Some of the older men showed the younger generation how the turf was cut and dried and was brought home then eventually as fuel for the winter. And they also had the important event of having the tea or the tea in the bog with the soda farls and the country butter, and that proved a great success with everybody, and especially the younger folk that went along.
Would they have walked up then, or would some of the maybe wealthier ones had a horse and cart?
They would have had a horse. A lot of them would have walked, but most people would have had a horse and cart because they needed to bring the turf home and that, and also to bring them up and down whatever they were bringing with them for to set up at the site during the summer months.
So the cluster, do you know numbers? Would it have been?
I think the clusters were probably about 5 or 6 would have been a maximum in each cluster of bully huts.
Mary, did the people from Hilltown go up into the clusters as a group? Was it family groups? Do you know how many possibly that would have been there?
They possibly all went as family groups and as neighbours together. I would imagine they went in numbers at the same time, and it usually was between the 1st of May and the 31st of October. So whatever number of months in that time, probably some people wouldn't have went for all that time. Maybe some only spent a couple of months, others spent longer, but they would have went, I imagine, as groups, either family or neighbours together. Most families would have had a horse and cart in those days, and probably a lot of the younger people would have walked, and the mothers and grandparents and that would have travelled in the horse and cart, and then they had the horse and cart for bringing the turf home again for the winter fuel. The turf cutting, as was mentioned during the bullying, was continued on for many years after the bullying ended. Turf was the main fuel for the fires in the area, for the winter fuel, and all the families went during the summer months to cut the turf and then back to get it dried out, and that followed on then to bring it home and stack it at the side of the house for their fires in the winter time. And the turf cutting again was a great day out because they took the tea in the bog, boiled the kettles over the turf fire that they set up, and they always said that there was a special taste to the tea in the bog because the water was the fresh water that was from the nearby stream. And during the Bully Fair, on the day to the bog, they also recreated that with giving the people a sample of the soda farls and the country butter, as to sort of illustrate what it would have been like in the olden days. And a few farmers until very recently were still cutting some turf and bringing it home. Well, the fair day, the two main fairs in Hilltown was the May Fair and the October Fair, which was the fairs before and after the bullying. So it was. They were the two main fairs in Hilltown, which were known far and wide, and that was again recreated during the bully fairs. They had the fair day and the horse fair, and all to try to recreate the aspect of the fair days. The bullying usually happened in the summer months between the May Fair in Hilltown and the October Fair, which were two very well known days in the farming life of the Hilltown area.
So then when they come back into the village in October, they'd have had the hard winter months
ahead of them, and they had the fair before that when they sold their cattle or sheep and horses and pigs at all different points in the village.
And the May Fair then was
similar before they went to the bully sites.